Hey guys, so this is our last section for this chapter. Um, yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about kind of the pressures to open Japan. So we've been talking about this whole period of about 200 years where Japan was completely closed to the outside world. They did not let people in except very, very select few. And so this is kind of talking about how that started to change and move into the next sort of phase of Japan's history, which was the Meiji period. So, anyway, we're going to start off with talking about law and order. So, um, yeah, my kind of a guiding question for us is just because there's a law, does that mean that people always follow it? Well, I mean, we probably all know that the answer is no. So, um, what's the point of laws if people don't always just follow them? Okay, so um, the way that that kind of relates to Edo Japan is that the shogunate issued many laws to try to control people. In fact, some of these laws were either ignored or they found ways around them, just like here, right? If there's a law and some people are going to follow it, some people are going to not follow it, and they're going to find a way to get around it. So, in other words, the laws of the country do not always reflect an accurate picture of how people live in that country. Um, yeah, they portray an accurate picture of how the government wants people to live, but not necessarily how it actually happens. So, can you think of any examples of this in Canadian society? So, what's a law that we have that maybe people don't always follow? So, changes within Japan. So, Japan's feudal society, which had been established by the shogun, was in times of conflict and poverty, was beginning to feel outdated in these times of wealth and peace. So, when you're feeling like you're getting attacked from the outside, it makes sense to shut everything down. But then, after 200 years of peace, people are like, "Do we really need this anymore? Like, what's the whole point of not letting anyone in?" Um, and the people that were alive then had never lived through the times of uh, conflict before, so they didn't really know what they were. They didn't really know what they had. So the shoguns would try to resist and discourage change, but as time passed, it became increasingly difficult. So I want you to think back to remember when we learned about the Middle Ages and what were some of the factors that brought about the end of that era. Um, so, what are some of the things that brought us out of the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance? I want you to try to think of two. Awesome. The class system in upheaval. So you guys had learned last chapter about the class system and how everyone had different jobs. So towards the end of the Edo period, merchants gained wealth and power because more people services. I think I meant to say because more people needed their services. So merchants were doing well, um, because they were in charge of storing rice and converting it to cash or credits, and they lent money in a time where everyone needed loans so that they could, as people were paying them back, they made interest. So the merchants were actually making the most money. Everyone else was struggling because peasants needed money to pay taxes, and were struggling with that. The daimyo were going bankrupt, so this was because they were doing things like building roads, and they were trying to do all these improvements that were expected of them, and they didn't have enough money. And the samurai just didn't really have any work to do. There wasn't really conflict, so there was, and then yeah, things were pretty peaceful, so the samurai didn't have a lot to do. So everyone was looking for someone to blame for why this was happening, and boom, a lot of people blamed the shogunate. So many people blamed the shogun and his extravagant officials. Some claimed that the shogunate held power illegally and that the power rightfully belonged to the emperor, though the emperor had not ruled in many centuries. So um, what they had feared, what the shogun feared was happening, or this is something that he feared forever, and now it's really happening. Is that people are questioning him, people are thinking he doesn't deserve his power, they're blaming him, and all he was trying to do for so long was to uh, restrict what people were exposed to so that they completely trusted him, and now they don't completely trust him. They're starting to question him. So um, that happened, and we had some disasters and hard times. So in the late 1700s and early 1800s, Japan was struck by many natural disasters that brought about famines and took many lives. About a third of the population died of starvation. That's a lot of people. 1 in 3 people died of starvation because Japan did not have enough, could not produce enough food in those disasters. And Japan wasn't trading with others, so it couldn't get enough food. Um, so land was deserted as peasants fled to the cities where they could often not find work. So if the peasants were dying, um, didn't have enough food on their farms and stuff, then they would just leave as a last ditch effort to try to go find some work in the city. Rice was so scarce that the price rose steeply. So there wasn't enough of it, which means that the people that did have it could charge crazy amounts of money for it. So then only the rich people could afford it, which made people really mad. City dwellers rioted over price increases and attacked the homes of the wealthy. So people were super upset at the wealthy because they had this stuff and they could afford rice and their families were fed, and the people who weren't wealthy didn't have it. And so they were really mad and they attacked the homes of the wealthy. So in this, many people did not feel as though the shogunate's responses to the problems were effective. They thought that it seemed like the shogun just didn't care that much, and maybe didn't care if they starved or if they lived or died, and he still had what he needed and lived an extravagant life with his all of his extravagant officials and all of that, and these people were starving and dying. So that's one of the big problems that started to bring about change in Japan, is that people were really upset and they started to riot. And another one is what we call an expansionist threat from outside. So expansionist means countries wanting to expand and take over more area. So by the early 1800s, several nations were knocking on Japan's door. One of them being Russia, another one being the US, and another one being England. All of these countries wanted in. So they all wanted to trade, but at the very least, they were hoping that Japan would at least be open to water and coal for their passing ships. So all three of these had like whaling ships and stuff and trade ships that would go near there, but they couldn't stop in Japan and get fuel if they needed it for their ships. So they had to carry more. So they were hoping that maybe if Japan opened up, that they would be able to use them in that way to get stuff for their passing ships. But the shogunate responded with something called the no second thought expulsion order. And what this kind of sums up, or not, what summed up what it said was that whenever a foreign ship is sighted approaching any point on our coast, all persons on hand should fire and drive it off. If the foreigners force their way ashore, you may capture and incarcerate or imprison them, and if the mothership approaches, you may destroy it. So, despite all this other stuff going on, his response, or the shogunate's response to this expansionist threat, so these countries wanting to trade, was not different. It was very much the same. It was to attack, destroy, imprison. Do not let them come ashore. And last thing we're going to talk about today is just the reason why the U.S. wanted to connect, or why it was interested in Japan in the first place. So the way that this chart works is that these reasons over here are just geographical. They're geography reasons. This is economy reasons, so money reasons. And this is things that have both. So we'll start with geography. So once Oregon and California became part of the United States, so they weren't always, but they did, country bordered the Pacific Ocean. So on one side of the Pacific Ocean was the Oregon and California. Across the ocean was Japan. So they shared kind of that border of the Pacific. A proposed transcontinental railway would connect with the Trans-Pacific ship route to China. So they were trying to build a railroad across the country that then would connect with a ship route, and that ship route went to China. But if it goes to China, it's going to kind of have to go by Japan. Some economic reasons. So the California gold rush gave the United States more money to buy more goods, and Japan was a source of new different products. So um, a gold rush is basically when they find gold and then they dig it up and they sell it, and it's like, woo, everyone has a lot for a little while until the gold's all gone and then people don't have a lot. But there was extra money, and they really, really wanted to see what Japan might have all over the world. Different places have different kind of products and things that other places don't have, and so the U.S. just was really curious what they could get. And rapidly growing American industries produced many products to trade with other countries. So also, the Americans made lots of things, and when you make a lot of things and you can sell them to other countries, you can make a lot of money. And so they were really hoping that Japan would want to trade with them and would want to buy a lot of these products that they had made. So these regions in the middle have both. So the United States had huge investments in the whaling industry in the Pacific. Um, Japan is in the Pacific. It's an island in the Pacific, and so if the U.S. has huge interest in the whaling industry there, they're going to be wanting to have a positive relationship with Japan. And the United States needed stations between San Francisco and Canton where whaling ships could refuel and get supplies. So this is what we are talking about. The last one is that they just wanted a place where they could stop, get supplies, get some fuel, and keep going, so they didn't have to carry as much with them. So these are all the reasons for the U.S. interest in Japan. Next chapter, you're going to get into learning about the U.S. and Japan's interactions in like these early days. So this just sort of sets the stage for why did they want it. But yeah, we're going to stop there for today. So thanks for tuning in. Yeah, and Mr. Lionheart will be it's back to him, so he'll be posting lessons for the next week or so, and then it'll be back to me. Have a wonderful Monday, and I will talk to you soon.